And now the moment you have all been waiting for. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce our moderator, my friend, America's, I say, educator, Dr. Greg Carr, and our esteemed panelists, Mr. Marc Morial and Ms. Christine Sampson-Clarke. First, I will introduce Dr. Carr, who is an associate professor of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. HU. I know y'all didn't all go to Howard. Okay. He is also an adjunct professor at the Howard School of Law. He is first vice president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations and editor of The Compass. A former board member of the National Council for Black Studies, Dr. Carr has twice been named National HBCU Male Faculty Member of the Year by HBCU Digest and has been voted Professor of the Year several times by Howard students. His writing has appeared in books, academic and popular journals, and he serves as a contributor to and commentator in wide range of media. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Greg Carr to the podium. And as he's coming, I want to also now welcome Mr. Marc Morial. Please join us. He has been the president and CEO of the National Urban League since 2003. In this capacity, Mr. Morial has been the primary catalyst for an era of change and a transformation for the 100-plus-year-old civil rights organization. His energetic and skilled leadership has expanded the League's work around an empowerment agenda, redefining civil rights in the 21st century, with a renowned emphasis on closing the economic gaps between whites and blacks and rich and poor Americans. Please give him a round of applause. Good to see you, Marc. Next, please welcome Ms. Christine Sampson-Clarke. She is an educator, advocate, activist, and union leader. She began her career in she brought her home. Okay. Right, that's the fam. She began her career in education 30-plus years ago. She has taught in special education schools and classrooms, alternative education programs, and in public schools in the Trenton School District in New Jersey. Christine became a building rep for her association in her district and has held officer positions in the Trenton Education Association and the Mercer County Education Association. Christine continues to sit on the New Jersey Education Association Executive Committee. She was a director on the board of the National Education Association, where she was chair of the NEA Internal Concerns Committee. We got concerns. Welcome to the panel. Dr. Carr will now take us further into the program. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Okay. All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Great to be with you.
Right.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
This is Christine. All right. So we're going to get started. Wanted to take a moment to recognize an educator before we get started who made transition this past Monday. Russell Lee Adams, who was the longtime chair of African Studies at Howard University, the man that hired me. Hey, what's up, Lopez? Yes, Dr. Adams. Many people may not know him for his work at Howard. They may not know him for his publishing in academic journals and chapters of books, but they will know him for a book that came out of a meeting of the National Education Association that said we needed more black stuff in the curriculum, and that was the 1963 book, Great Negroes Past and Present. Do y'all remember this book? Exactly. Amen. This is not the Academy, the Ivory Tower, or the Ebony Tower. This is black scholarship in service of black people, and of course, as Carter Woodson would say, bringing it from the community. And that's where I wanted to start. And in a minute, Christine, I'm going to ask you about the context of how we do this work with another figure from ASALH who sit at the nexus of NEA, ASALH, and the American Teachers Association. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Brother Mayor, before we go any further, I think this is the 100th anniversary of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters.
Oh, yeah.
And this year, and think about a book by Joe Trotter called Workers on Arrival. We were brought here to work, bring all our skills. Your work, not only with the Urban League, but all the years that preceded that, have grappled with this question of how we not only achieve economic success, but how we improve our lot as a community, as a group, as a race. Could you walk us a little bit through how the Urban League is gearing up to face this current moment and how that kind of builds on the momentum of all the generations past, beginning with now over a century of work with the Urban League?
So first of all, good afternoon to all. And to Sylvia and the ASALH team, give them a big round of applause. What incredible work. I was last here in 2010, which was the centennial of the National Urban League, but let me kind of quickly go through this. Both the NAACP and the National Urban League were founded, NAA in 1909, National Urban League in 1910. Interestingly, both founded in the North to confront issues that blacks in both the North and the South faced. Both founded, and this is the important point, after Plessy took place and we were purged from the voting rolls, and an entire new system of oppression was created through state laws, city ordinance, and customs. Those of that generation responded. The way in which they responded is they organized.
Yes.
They organized the NAACP, the National Urban League, Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Omega Psi Phi, etc., the Divine Nine, fraternities, professional associations, black doctors, NMA, black lawyers, NBA, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They organized. They began in those days. A. Philip Randolph, who you mentioned, began to organize and demand that the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters be given the right to bargain with railroads on behalf of black workers. They organized. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters was created when black railroad workers were told, you cannot join the union. So, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And these organizations carried the fight along with the black church, black colleges and universities, Prince Hall Masons, the myriad of associations and organizations that we created carried the fight for us really from the late 1800s and the end of Reconstruction all the way until the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s. And it's so important that the Brown versus the Board of Education lawsuit brought by Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, was imagined in the 1930s by Charles Hamilton Houston, then Dean of the Howard University School of Law, and his proteges, Thurgood Marshall. That ingenuity and that creativity came from the NAACP's legal department. In this moment, we are being challenged because there has been war declared on us. And that war that's been declared is a war on the last 70 years. A war on every progress, not only that we have made, that this nation has made since 1954. And the question for us, are we built for the moment? In this town, we see hardworking federal civil servants who've given their life and their career being indiscriminately thrown to the side. We see threats to undermine those agencies within the government that were the fruits of this movement. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the unit in the Department of Labor that held federal contractors accountable, to gut the infrastructure, And then we see in the military, under the guise of anti-wokeness, a purge of black, women, and LGBTQ officers in the military. We should not be fooled by what we are facing in this moment. And to continue the conversation, I know I don't want to, we are going to have to respond. So on Wednesday of this week, the National Urban League, represented by the Legal Defense Fund, which is the successor to Thurgood Marshall's NAACP legal department, we filed suit against the Trump administration seeking an injunction to invalidate those 3 DE&I executive orders. And yesterday, in a companion case, a case like ours, a federal judge in Maryland froze all of those DE&I executive orders by issuing a permanent injunction against them. And Mary Frances Berry said what I think is important: every tool, the courts, mobilization, encouragement, resistance, voting are in order in this moment. Now, don't want to look back, but a lot of folks were sleeping during the election.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They had tricked themselves into disempowerment.
Yeah.
They got distracted by commercials whose intention was to distract.
That's right.
And the psychological campaign, which began in 2016 when the Russians got involved in our election, to divide, suppress, confuse African-American voters, is alive and well. Yesterday, there was a Black History Month celebration at the White House. I'm not going to pretend that I saw all of y'all there, because I wasn't there. But here's the thing. Imagine the disrespect and the hypocrisy of, on one hand, celebrating Black History Month, while at the same time you are purging the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from his position in an unprecedented political way. I'll stop there.
Well, let's continue just for a second. Oh, yeah, please, round of applause, please, for framing that so beautifully. Thank you, Brother Morial. Christine, before I go to you, I do want to ask a quick follow-up question, Brother Morial, as it relates to, you mentioned organized labor, collective bargaining, the assaults there, the lawsuits. We saw last week that several of the lawsuits failed, not on the merits, but on standing. They wouldn't allow the unions to substitute themselves for the individuals who directly harmed. What was you all, from the beginning, the Urban League has done direct service, has really grappled with people at the point of entry, coming up from the South, and then from then to now. What is the Urban League's best advice to those who are most directly in harm's way? There are people here from National Park Service, of course, who are underthought. We got a lot of young people who are probationary. Quit your job, not quit your job.
It may well be that when a case is dismissed for lack of standing, it can be refiled.
Well, that's what they're doing. Yes, sir.
and amended.
Yes, sir.
And the best thing for everyone to do is to avail themselves of the process to appeal their terminations so they do not forfeit their right to sue.
Excellent.
So in some days there's a 30-day clock, a 60-day clock where you have to appeal because people are receiving notices that say you are being terminated for poor performance. And they say, well, I never was evaluated. Or my performance evaluation was sterling. We have to get the word out. Now, I'll say this. We cannot let a four-letter word enter into our consciousness and vocabulary. That four-letter word starts with an F. It's called F-E-A-R, fear. We cannot be afraid. Fear.
These Omegas out here, man. What y'all acting up? This Carr G. Woodson people, y'all acting crazy.
So I think all have to get the word out that you've got to take charge of your own situation and protect yourself by appealing, which sets up the ability. In some cases, a prerequisite to a lawsuit is filing through the civil service system. Or if there's a grievance system, if you're in a collective bargaining unit, there are many, many things. And I would hope that groups like AFGE, which I know he's been out there working hard, Blacks in Government, other organizations, will help to advise. I think our Divine Nine, our churches, who have lots of members who are federal employees, can provide information webinars to say, here are the steps we need to take now. The worst thing to do is to sit back and do nothing. Let 8 months, 10 months go by, and they say, well, you missed the deadline. You have no claim. It is clear that these terminations are illegal. We are seeing what we were concerned with, the effort to create authoritarian and totalitarian power in this country. And like our ancestors did, they organize and they push back. Imagine Carter G. Woodson. Now imagine this. 1916, he's organizing Negro History Week. Now, if there had been an internet and social media, he would have been roundly attacked. You think he was riding down Easy Street for those of that generation who had no right to vote, sat behind the screens on the buses, couldn't go here, couldn't do this, couldn't buy a house in this neighborhood? Imagine the courage it took for them to do what they did. And here we are, 70 years later, with all these degrees, resumes, accomplishments, sophistication, and articulation. And all we have to do is have the will to fight intelligently in this moment. And that's what I'm appealing to everyone to do. We sued on Wednesday. I had a couple of my, I'll say some people inside my organization at the board level, you know, they were like, I'm saying, just look, settle down. Filing a lawsuit is not a radical thing. It's not a radical thing. Thousands and thousands of lawsuits are filed every day across America, and we have the right to ask the third branch of government, the judicial branch of government, right, to intervene if one branch of government has exceeded its power and its authority. Not to say that lawsuits are the only way, but they are just one tool we must use to push back. But the bottom line is, understand this as an attack on civil rights, an attack on progress, an attack on the last 70 years. It's bigger than firing employees, DE&I, ABCD, transgender. It is an attack on the last 70 years. And that's why we have a generational responsibility to the next generation, to our children and children's children, to do everything we can to slow it down, to stop it, and to discredit it for what it is. It's a campaign of hate. It's a campaign of division.
Thank you, Brother Morial. And we're about halfway through our time, so that's actually a perfect kind of transition for a moment. Sister Christine, I want to ask you about this, and I'll ask you in the spirit of a longtime member of ASALH, an ancestor now who I imagine there are a number of people in this room who knew her, Thelma Davis Perry, who was the editor for a long time of the Negro History Bulletin, Black History Bulletin, yeah, who, when the American Teachers Association merged with the NEA, and the NEA paid for the writing of the histories of the state teachers associations. And over the years, it's cost me a lot of money to get all those books, but I have them. But now, of course, they're all digitized. I think Harvard has the platform. Too bad we didn't raise money so that the HBCU would have the platform. Yeah, exactly, that's next time, right? But Thelma Perry's book, which brings together many of those books, The History of the American Teachers Association, is a collaboration between the NEA, ASALH, and the ATA. In this book, of course, she chronicles, among other things, and now I'm thinking about her editorial in the Negro History Bulletin of February 1976. And we know next year will mark 100 years since Negro History Week has been celebrated. Thelma Perry wrote that, in addition to saying that it's the second week of February, as we know, because of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. But if the two birthdays don't fall in the same week, it's Douglass's birthday that will be the one. I mean, I love how you ASALH folk kind of do that. But she says, this work is to advance the study of black people that we've been doing for decades. Where you sit at the nexus as a classroom teacher, as an administrator, sitting with the NEA, which is the big bully on the block, and help, how do we or should we be thinking about this war on learning, this war on black memory, and what ways can you leverage, like previous generations leveraged when they had the, I think Carr Woodson called it the sequel to slavery, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, in some ways the protections of segregation, to do that work in the classrooms every day, but we no longer have that hedge, and now the enemy is not only at the gates, they are in the classrooms, and now you're sitting there with very few black teachers. How do we now have to think about curriculum, instruction, teaching, learning, black memory in an age where we no longer have the black spaces that we had when this association pioneered the development of black curriculum beyond the white gaze?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank the president of NEA, Becky Pringle, for giving me this opportunity to represent her and our 3 million members throughout the country, and to really dig into something you already kind of start talking about, right? We're a union, and we are labor strong, and we recognize that there are several forms of power out there, and power that's being used against us right now. You talked about the power of the state. And you talked about the power of legislative that we could use to try to fight that. But unions talk about the power of the collective. That's right. It talks about the power of numbers. And not only our union members, but also collectively engulfing the power of our communities, of the parents, of the people, of the children themselves to have voice. To let them know that, I love what Dr. Lonnie Bunch said, about we need to make sure that we are teaching history that they have to know, that they can't forget. We have to make sure that we find our ways, and we just had a speaker who said, we gotta go covertly to talk about history, we're gonna do that. They can try to say, don't do this, but we're gonna do it because we did it before, and we'll do it again. We don't have to be stopped by curriculum, we don't have to be boxed in. We know ways to do it, and we will teach our colleagues to do it. And for our colleagues that don't want to do it,
come on now, This is what I'm waiting for that.
we'll let them know, right? Because our parents are our best, and our parents love us. I have a whole table of educators sitting right there. Yes, and I know there's a bunch of educators in the room. And time again, we survey our parents and our community partners, and they see the educators in the building as a trusted source of protecting the children and making sure the children are safe, welcomed, and encouraged to strive and thrive in this environment, no matter what it is. We have to protect our babies, and we don't have a problem teaching the truth. And the NEA, and our partners make sure that we give our teachers all kinds of resources so that they can teach honesty in education. Yes. And we give our boards, we help them collectively, whether they are in a bargaining state or not. We give them model language so that they can write into their guidelines, into their constitutions, into their bylaws, protections that will protect them from this, what's happening now, to make sure that we can continue to teach the truth. In New Jersey, we have the Amistad Commission.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Pioneering commission.
Pioneering.
Absolutely.
And from 2002, before all of this craziness, because this is not new. Like you said, 70 years. This is not new. Attacks on education, attacks on teaching the truth. You remember teach them reading and math, and that's it. Okay, we can teach reading, but while we're teaching reading, we're going to teach our history. We can teach math, but when I'm teaching my algebra courses, trust and believe I'm teaching our history in those math problems. Every word probably can have some history in it, and that's how we do it. We get around it. We invite guests into our classrooms who, it may be career day, but their career day is also uplifting their culture. There are so many ways that we can do this work collectively using our collective power of numbers. We don't have to be afraid to do this work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. In fact, I'm looking at, and thank you all for those who submitted questions. So I'm going to read through them in a moment and see if we can cluster some. But I want to ask you a follow-up question as well. The relationship between parents and communities. We were talking backstage with Dr. Matthews, who's with the Buffalo Soldiers West Point formation, and she and her sister out of Topeka, Kansas. I don't know if y'all have seen Sharice Shedney's new book, Blacks Against Brown. Ain't nobody try to give up their school just to go sit next to a white child, and she chronicles how these black folk felt betrayed. There's a class dimension in this thing that we don't often speak of, but we should, because Carter Woodson came out of coal mine, and he never, whether it be the Miseducation Negro or the book that y'all published, Carter Woodson's Appeal, he never missed an opportunity to slap the black bourgeoisie around. That having been said, you mentioned the teachers in the classrooms, and you mentioned the parents. What role does the community have to play in this black memory war that we face now? Even as we face down Moms for Liberty and they're taking over school district boards because we don't go to the meetings and don't let. What role do the churches, the community centers, the sororities, the fraternities, the formations have in not just supporting, but maybe even helping to lead some of this black memory war? Are there roles that they should play, and how does NEA, how could NEA?
For sure. So we definitely, we have Public School Strong, where we are not just out. All right, who's my Public School Strong people out there? So Public School Strong is an NEA initiative to help our parents, our community partners, find issues that matter to them and give them training and resources and support through our educators, through our union members and our affiliates to help them understand their power, to help them learn how to speak up at a board meeting, to collectively meet in those spaces, like you said, in their churches, because that's where they're at, right? At the grocery store, in the laundromat. I have an educator and a parent that created reading centers in local laundromats. And they have thousands of books were donated.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Bookshelves were donated. And the laundromat said, we have the space, you bring it in. And they set up little libraries and little reading centers in the library, in the laundromat, because that's where a lot of our kids are spending their time.
I like that. That reminds me of Oliver Jones's house where Carter Woodson was reading the book. They had just put it in the parlor,
Just
put it in
there. And then the parents are there volunteering, the parents are reading, right? And the educator and parents are together. So there are spaces where our parents can be already, they can invite us into, right? We don't have to be boxed in by the school building. Right? Education happens everywhere, and educators are everywhere. And so we're in the churches, we're at the laundromat, we're at the grocery store, and many of our parents are our friends, our family members.
No question.
So when we speak with them and say, we need you, we can help them feel comfortable coming into the school buildings, coming into the board meetings, and speaking up for their children.
Thank you, Sister Sampson-Clarke. All right, yeah, please. Yeah, we getting into it now. Let's I'm gonna read some of these questions, and then either one of you can just jump in here. But I will start with this one, Brother Morial, since you've had to run a city and have had all this interface from the federal government, state, and local government. Somebody is asking, I guess it's a trick question. Is this a trick question? I don't know. Do you think the President of the United States has too much power? No, I mean, could you, I know, look, we all know, hopefully we all took civics, but you talked a little bit earlier about Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, Constitution. You didn't frame it that way, but talking about the courts. Is this bluster?
I don't think the president has too much power.
Okay, yeah.
I think that the system is designed with the expectation that the Congress will put a check and the courts will put a check
Yes.
on the abuse of executive power. So think about what is happening now. Let's talk about the layoffs. There has not been a congressional budget resolution or appropriations act shutting down those positions, defunding those positions. What you have is executive overreach, going in and simply firing people indiscriminately, violating their due process rights, and you have too much, not enough outrage coming from the legislative branch. And I want to hear outrage from the D's and the R's. It shouldn't just, we don't have high expectations on most of the R's, but even the D's, in my opinion, have been too silent.
Thanks.
Too silent
Thanks.
to push back on overreach and abuse of power. Mayor Pratt, if you and I had done that, we'd be before a federal grand jury. We would be called a malfeasance, misfeasance, and abuse of power. That's number one. Number two, the president cannot, by executive order, make law. The president cannot, by executive order, change duly promulgated administrative rules or repeal or modify statutes or adjust court decisions and how they have been interpreted. So all of these executive orders, the anti-DE&I executive order, this insulting executive order to take away birthright citizenship, are all what I call unlawful and extra legal.
Can I ask you just on the second piece? People have been saying that that's a non-starter, but we know that the 14th Amendment also talks about those subject to jurisdiction or subject to jurisdiction thereof. Do you think the makeup of the federal courts, particularly at the level of the Supreme Court, they might even entertain what is clearly a theory they've been pushing for decades on that question of birthright?
How do you have jurisdiction to deport them if they're in the country? You have jurisdiction over them.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, you know,
so,
you know better than
well,
they've
I'll
been
say
developing
this.
this theory for quite some time.
So part of this, if you will, campaign on civil rights includes the United States Supreme Court. And it includes a court now, which you're right, Dr. Carr, we have no idea whether they would grasp a specious misinterpretation. What we're on the brink of is a constitutional crisis. What we're on the brink of is something that is not sustainable. I would say to my Republican friends, you want to create a precedent of enormous executive power. How will you feel when the shoe is on the other foot?
Uh-oh.
When those awesome powers may be in the hands of someone you don't like. If you look at Supreme Court decisions interpreting the power of the president versus the Congress, what is very interesting is you see court decisions when the Republican president is in office expanding presidential power. You see court decisions when a Democrat is in power seeking to curtail presidential power. There's a political element to all of this, which is why if we do not understand that the most fundamental way we can maximize our power is by voting with a vengeance and voting in large numbers, what has this movement for the last 70 years been about? And we have to tell people in our community, voting is not a panacea. It's not a transaction. I heard folk saying, man, you know, I got a check. Is somebody going to give me a check? I said, is your check gone? I said, you got a check, right? You got another check from Biden. He just didn't put his name on it.
How about that?
He wasn't narcissistic enough to say, look what I did for you. But all of this to say, Dr. Carr, yes, we have no idea what the Supreme Court, I am just so hopeful that this Supreme Court is going to stand up and do its damn job when a case gets there. I don't know how much faith I can have, but I have to seek to have faith, because what is on the line is the very future of our constitutional democracy.
Absolutely.
And no group of citizens have put more faith in constitutional democracy than black people. We've had faith even in our darkest of hours. So I pray and I hope that the Supreme Court will do the right thing, but meanwhile, we have to do what we have to do to push back against all of this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask, I'm trying to cluster some questions so we can get everybody's voice in the few minutes we have. How can ASALH, do you think, Sister Sampson-Clarke, how can ASALH partner better? There's the question of, a question was raised, do folk know enough about the work of ASALH? As ASALH, maybe not just the individuals in here, but ASALH. How can ASALH partner better with NEA, with other formations to kind of get this work done?
I mean, the great thing is that ASALH and NEA have a partnership that goes way back, right? Back to Reg Weaver. He was president when I came involved at the national level. So ASALH has been involved. I think right now, going back to the concept of numbers, and unfortunately not relying on what we already know. I'm a math teacher, not a civics teacher, but I know about those three branches of government. And right now we know that those branches are skewed. Either they are feeling powerless or they've been stacked. So we have to do something to fix that up. So in a recent conversation, one of my state's affiliates from Florida said, hey, we got some special elections coming up that we need to get people behind to try to change the numbers, flip the numbers that's going on in the House right now. So ASALH has affiliates in those spaces, and they have people ready to get on the ground, boots on the ground. Let's get people out there working those spaces and try to help change those numbers. And the NEA is willing to work and get numbers out. I was out. How many people were out there, had boots on the ground and make a difference? We got to get out there because, to your point, people sat home. We were hurt mostly because people didn't vote. And we got to knock on doors, and we got to tell every person that we know, as Becky would say, if they live, you love them. If they live with you, if you pay their cell phone bills, they need to make sure they get out there and vote. And we got to do that, and we just didn't do that. And ASALH and NEA together, along with our other partners, we know millions of people in this country. But we know that millions of people didn't vote that needed to. And it's our time to make sure that they do in these special elections, because we have to change, we got to flip the scales back. That's the only way we're going to do it. Once the scales start to flip, then maybe some of our Democrats will start to feel their power, because it is about numbers. And they don't have to feel like they're out alone. And maybe some of our Republicans who are more moderate but are just afraid to be in that space anymore will feel uplifted. Right? And so I love to see our members from ASALH come in with NEA affiliates who are in their locals as well to help get out there and do the work and meet the people where they're at. Hosting some talks, some meets, to come out and hear from each other to understand why this is important.
Thank you. I raised class a moment ago and kind of helped answer that with some of these initiatives that are coming out of the community. I want to now raise age, and there are a cluster of questions that have come in around generation gaps, younger generation, organizing, where young people are, whether it be, I suppose, in collective bargaining, although we're seeing unions experience a little bit of a resurgence. And I want to tie that to another question that came in from Denise Willard Barnes, who's, of course, the publisher of the Washington Informer, our black press represented here. Absolutely. Give them definitely a clap. Who is asking about the role of the black press and why it is often overlooked, rather historically, or more importantly, or equally importantly now. With young people now being captured, in particular around social media distraction, we had a whole university appear and then disappear in about 5 minutes, apparently. Hillman, TikTok. Anyway, how do we marshal what has been called legacy organizations, whether it be the Urban League, NAACP, even the Black Caucus of the NEA, to reach intergenerationally to kind of energize these students to help them understand here, this theme, of course, this year being labor, the importance of collective bargaining and becoming involved, the importance of respecting those who have come before you, even as in dialogue, you contribute your new way of doing things. Either of you all have you
So at the Urban League movement, and I want to acknowledge my colleague George Lambert, who's here, the most powerful change that's occurred in the last 20 years has been the creation of and the standing up of the National Urban League Young Professionals. We now have some 10 to 15,000 members of this auxiliary under the age of 40, 20 to 40. And if you attend an Urban League event these days, if you attend the Legislative Policy Conference, a majority of the participants are members of the National Urban League Young Professionals. So what we did, we were intentional. So intentionality is key. ASALH, for example, our organizations could create a youth wing, a college division, something very specific. You see, young people don't want to come in the room and sit in the back of the room. And one thing we did with the National Urban League Young Professionals is give young people a seat at the table, the ability to be leaders, the ability to be a president, the ability to be chair of a civic engagement committee, because they have their own organizational structure, and then their president sits on the National Urban League Board of Trustees. So it's an intentional effort. Consider this great event if there was a very, very specific intention to bring 50 African American studies students from colleges and universities to attend. The first ASALH convention I attended, I was a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I was a double major in economics and African American studies. In my junior year, I had a job, a campus job, working in what was then known the African American Studies program. And I remember Dr. James Washington, I think it was his name at the time, asked me, he says, you want to go down to this convention? There's a luncheon taking place on Saturday. You want to go down to this convention? I mean, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Free food, right? I'm a college student. But it was my first opportunity to sit in a room of people who were in love with and speaking the gospel of African American history and studies. So we have to be intentional. There's a tendency in intergenerational conflict to be critical of young people. Yeah. And I really want to warn people against that. Yeah. Do you remember when you were 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, 24 years old? See, this is what I remember. I had a big old afro. I went by my grandmother's house. She looked at me, she said, boy, where you get this from? You can't come in my house.
She wouldn't let you.
It was sort of in jest, but the point is that generational friction sometimes is not a new thing. Dr. King, John Lewis, Whitney Young, the leaders who organized the March on Washington in 1963, with the exception of Dorothy Height and A. Philip Randolph, were under 40 years of age. They were under 40. And they were leading this March on Washington. Dr. King was 26. Think of the role that people we would consider to be now millennials and Gen Zs were playing in the front of the movement, So we've got to understand that, but bring young people into the conversation. Give them a seat at the table. Give them an opportunity to be heard, right? That's what we need to do if we are wise, mature, in some case seasoned citizens.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Sister Christine, let me ask you this, because we got about 5 minutes, maybe a little less. I got the stopwatch on, trying to be a good steward of time. There are a cluster of questions around working through state legislatures, local government. Well, there are more questions coming.
Y'all not going home today?
The assault on public schools, we're seeing, of course, the attempt to privatize everything in between school vouchers and the Wrestling Federation chairwoman, who is now the Secretary of Education. There's a concern that we are not doing enough at the state and local level. And you've obviously worked for many years at the state level, now at the national level. Could you talk a little bit about some strategies we might want to pursue? I don't know if it's running for school board or getting involved in. You mentioned the Amstock Commission, some things that maybe we should be thinking about.
Sure, for sure. So many of our affiliates do have C-Educator run programs where that's right, there we go. And you're running for an office right now. So we are, to your point, trying to make sure we're intentional that we have our educators and our parents run for those board seats, to run for city council and commissioners of education, county commissioners. We have in New Jersey, actually, our president of our association is running for governor. It'll be the first time. That's right. Yes, I'll send you his donation form later, because it's about money, right? But to make sure that they do have a seat at the government level, that they understand the importance of our public schools, that they realize that voucher programs are just ways to give the rich our money and to leave our kids without, that we need to make sure that our curriculums are protected, that Title I funding does come down to the school level, that our special education students, as a special educator, I recognize that trying to go after and dismantle the U.S. Department of Education is basically going to decimate the programs and supports that my kids have. The Medicaid that supports speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, child study, right? Free lunch programs, free breakfast. Some of my kids, the only meal they have is the meal they have at our schools. And when you start talking about cutting funding and cutting protections, right, you're really talking about hurting kids.
No question.
And it's just, it blows my mind.
No question.
So we understand what's happening at the federal level, so we have to empower and have the states and the locals build up protections.
Got it, okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, that was the wrap up, so we gotta wrap this up. I don't know we don't have time for closing remarks. They're gonna come get me, so let me stop here and thank President Marc Morial, CEO of the National Urban League.
Thank you.
And thank Sister Christine Sampson-Clarke, Executive Committee Member, National Education Association. There was one question that came in. I'll answer it very quickly. Somebody said, why doesn't ASALH, why can we do more to promote Black History Month all year round? And remind with the last editorial written by Carr G. Woodson, I suppose on his deathbed, because it got published after he passed in 1950, no study and consequently no celebration, that Negro History Week, now Black History Month, is the short period of time when we celebrate what we have learned about the Negro the entire year. So every month is Black History Month, and February should be Blackest History Month, because that's when all the black stuff comes in one place. So thank you all. We're gonna move.